Vive Montréal! Vive le Québec! Vive le Québec libre! Vive! Vive! Vive le Canada français et vive la France!
Editorial reaction to the general's remarks, and perhaps the high point of protest came from a group of young people who paraded in front of the French consulate in the Queen City. Stan Ratton was there.
The students paraded with placards outside the consulate, but failed in an attempt to deliver a statement to the consul general. When they found the office locked, they settled for scribbling "Go home to Gaulle" on the door and decided to mail their protest against the French president's remarks to both the French ambassador in Ottawa and the consul general in Toronto. Gersten Dax, the leader of the student demonstrators, explained what the students were angry about.
The point we're trying to make is that we're sympathetic with the people of Quebec. We hope we understand their aspirations. We realize that a great deal of accommodation is required on both sides, the English and the French, in Canada. But we feel that this is a Canadian problem. It is not a problem in which foreign politicians, foreign dignitaries, and they use the term very loosely, should be involved, particularly when these people come to Canada as guests of the federal government.
What action do you think the federal government should take?
I feel I would regret very much these unfortunate statements being blown up into something much more significant than they really are, and I would certainly hope that the Canadian government would act with restraint toward President de Gaulle. The fact that one side, that one party has acted in an ill-mannered fashion does not mean that the object of his abuse should reciprocate.
But the main student group was not alone in its protest. Another student showed up to picket the consulate independently. I asked her what she thought the federal government should do about the general's remarks.
Well, I think the damage is rather irreparable now, and it's a matter of I really don't know. I'm just so angry about it that it's hard to be coherent, actually. I suppose the only choice left is for Pearson to ask de Gaulle to leave.
Here's what the main group of student demonstrators had to say.
It's the duty of the government to be a good host to General de Gaulle, who is, after all, our guest. But I think that private citizens can protest and show that the people of Canada do not appreciate General de Gaulle's statements.
Well, I feel that General de Gaulle has been a little bit out of place. It isn't really a question of English-Canadian versus French-Canadian. It's a question of a Canadianism, and it's an internal problem and not an external problem. And I feel that since he's been such an outspoken critic of colonialism, he should use his same advice and stay out of internal problems and not try to foment a crisis. I don't think he can do this. I think most French Canadians are very aware of the problem, and I don't think the radical element to which he speaks has that much power in Canada.
I think they should, somebody, I don't care if it's a party in power or not, but somebody should express the opinion that he's been extremely arrogant, and he shouldn't have any right at all to meddle in our internal affairs. And somebody should say this. I don't know who.
How about you?
Should I say it? I think, in my personal opinion, he's an arrogant fool. He's made a lot of blunders lately, and this is another one of them. And that he has no right to foment an internal Canadian problem.
Well, I feel that de Gaulle has been irresponsible, as this thing is said, and that someone in Ottawa should have the guts to stand up and speak out against him, and perhaps not permit him to speak again. I realize this is a free country, but de Gaulle, being the president of a republic, should not be talking the way he is, dividing Canada
And so someone should tell him either to go home or to be quiet.
I just think he's got absolutely no tact, no diplomacy, no nothing. I mean, he's just got a loud mouth, that's it.
While the student group was comparatively small, it did draw a large crowd of onlookers, including a couple of French-speaking Canadians, all of whom seemed to support the sentiments being expressed.
I'm glad to see something like this in the street. I think it's about time that English Canada woke up to a thing of this nature, that they should speak out in very strong terms, especially against somebody from outside of Canada who is seeking to interfere or meddle in an internal problem in this country.
The whole thing disgusts me to think that a man could come to this country and raise such a furore. I think it's terrible.
You sympathize with the demonstrators?
Yeah, sure. I'd put them on the next boat. I'd show them the St. Lawrence River how to get home.
I think the picketers are correct. De Gaulle has just undermined everything that Canada has been trying to achieve for a good number of years between Quebec and the rest of Canada. I think he's just shot it all down.
Well, I'm a French-speaking Canadian, and I do think that they're wrong. I think they've insulted us. I think they should ship de Gaulle back to France.
It's only a minority, really, that is following de Gaulle and Johnson. I think the real guilty party is Johnson, and de Gaulle is just a disturber. He's a crowd agitator and just playing his game. And Johnson is the real disturber, and his supporters are only a minority of French Canadians. And that's all I have to say.
And where are you from?
I'm from Montreal. I'm working here in Toronto now.
Some comments from Torontonians today on the Free Quebec statements of President de Gaulle. This is Stan Ratton, CBC News, Toronto.
Just about every radio and TV station in Canada received irate phone calls about the de Gaulle statements. In Ottawa, a private station was told that the railway route from Montreal to Ottawa would be mined when the president travels to the federal capital tomorrow. Also, there would be snipers along the way to make sure the plot didn't misfire. The man who called with this threat described himself as a former sergeant major in the Canadian Army, and here's his voice as he phoned in his statement.
How many men are involved in this plot?
10 of us.
10? Mm-hmm. All with the same idea?
Yeah, because we fought for them, and my father fought in the First World War and got those bastards out of the hook they're in, and now he comes over here after he got $2 billion, $400 million from the Marshall Plan, and he insults the United States and everything like that. This guy's a complete nut. So where does the nut go? He goes up in a cloud of dust.
Well, the RCMP are looking into that situation, but the political climate in Ottawa has been hot today. A cabinet meeting, and then a statement from the Prime Minister. Peter Laux has that story.
The Prime Minister's statement was postponed time after time this afternoon. When it finally did come, several hours later than originally estimated, it appeared truly to have been born of hard labor. One official called it the most delicate and most important single decision any government has had to make in recent years. Here's how the statement finally came out.
I am sure that Canadians in all parts of our country were pleased when the President of France received such a warm welcome in Quebec. However, certain statements by the President tend to encourage the small minority of our population whose aim is to destroy Canada. And as such, they are unacceptable to the Canadian people and to its government. The people of Canada are free. Every province of Canada is free. Canadians do not need to be liberated. Indeed, many thousands of Canadians gave their lives in 2 world wars in the liberation of France and other European countries. Canada will remain united and will reject any effort to destroy her unity. Canada has always had a special relationship with France, the motherland of so many Canadians. We attach the greatest importance to our friendship with the French people. It has been and remains the strong purpose of the government of Canada to foster that friendship. I hope that my discussions later this week with General de Gaulle will demonstrate that this purpose is one which he shares.
The statement then is hard-hitting and blunt, while at the same time holding out the olive branch to General de Gaulle, perhaps leaving the way open for him to recant or at least deny the meaning given to his words.
But let's give the last word to the people at Expo as we spoke to them today.
We've run into a lot of conflicting statements made by people concerning what's going on here in Quebec. It seems to me that in the restaurants we visited, and they haven't been the essentially top level restaurants, but they have been the common restaurants, and there's been a lot of anti-de Gaulle statements made. People felt a little bitter about all the dissension being caused here, and particularly by de Gaulle's visit. We haven't heard a whole lot of favorable comments about his visit or what his presence here is doing. It's been mostly unfavorable that we've heard. I think there's too much stress on being French or Canadian French here, and you're all living here in Canada. There's a wonderful country, a beautiful country, much to offer to everybody here. And I think the more everybody keeps talking about just being provincialistic, belonging to one little sector, I think it destroys a lot in Canada. I can't see where you can move ahead with your economy as fast as you should or anything else, unless the people unite and get behind the federal government.
He's made the separatism here.
Where are you from, ladies?
We're from Brooklyn, Rhode Island, and I'm from Rhode Island. Pawtucket, Rhode Island.
Are you going to try and see President de Gaulle while he's here?
No, we have no time with him. Who needs him?
Well, I don't think he should say the things he said about the French people going by themselves, but what can a person do, eh? Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a free country. He can say what he wants to say, eh?
Oh, I think he's a great man. One of the best he had in France.
What do you think of the things he was saying at the City Hall last night?
I think it's very nice of him, too.
Yeah.
From France, especially a man from France, a great man like him. He's a very good man. The way he spoke very good.
Yeah. Do you feel that he's interfering in our affairs?
No, not at all.
Would you care if he did?
No.
Huh?
Not at all. None of that.
You'd welcome it?
Oh, yes.
Vive la France!
De Gaulle in Montreal, produced for
Well, General de Gaulle listened to it all without any visible emotion, including pleasure. But it obviously tempered his last speech in Canada. He didn't reaffirm his Quebec Libre statement. He didn't explain his decision not to go to Ottawa. But he did seem to almost apologize for the Monday night outburst. He suggested that it had been prompted uncontrollably by the sight and sound of this dynamic explosion of French fact he was witnessing in Quebec, and of his realization of the common Quebec and French desire to make sure that the fact survived in Canada and the world, or was to decline and disappear. Here's how he put it.
Nos vœux, mes vœux, sont avec vous en partant aussi ardents que jamais, mais beaucoup plus précis, explicites. Et je voudrais que, quand je vous aurai quitté, avec ceux qui m'accompagnent, vous ayez gardé l'idée que la présence, pour quelques jours, du général de Gaulle dans ce Québec en pleine évolution, ce Québec qui se prend, ce Québec qui se décide, ce Québec qui devient maître de lui, mon voyage, dis-je, aura pu contribuer à votre élan.
There he was referring to the vitality and dynamism and ability to make decisions that he was seeing here. And at the end, he made that wonderful understatement of the year, saying that he hoped that General de Gaulle's visit and message to Quebec would be remembered. Well, the
world at 6.
If Prime Minister Lester Pearson is worried by the news of massive French technical, cultural, and economic aid to Quebec, he didn't show it at his news conference here today.
I see nothing to be disturbed about in plans and programs for cooperation of this kind between France or any other country and Quebec, any more than there would be anything to be disturbed about by a story that Great Britain was making special plans for cultural exchanges with any other Canadian province or Quebec. So I'm not, the report that I have received doesn't disturb me. But I would like to see the text of exactly what was given out before I make any final comment. In the report that I have, The minister directly concerned, this is a press report from Paris, said that the aid increase, he was talking about aid between France and Quebec in the field that you have mentioned, fell within the framework of the cooperation agreement between France and Quebec signed in 1965. And that agreement at the time it was signed was within the framework of arrangements that Canada had made with Quebec. So I don't think there's anything to be disturbed about on the basis of the report that I have received, but I'd like to see the actual text of what was said before I make any final comment.
The prime ministerial tone, then, isn't comparable by any stretch of the imagination to the reaction produced by the Vive le Québec libre shout which Charles de Gaulle voiced from the balcony of the Montreal City Hall, nor the hands-off reiteration which Ottawa put out after the French cabinet meeting at which de Gaulle pledged help to enable Quebecers to realize the, quote, freedom aims they've set for themselves. In short, the feeling here stands on the unacceptability of any outside interference in Canadian affairs, but it's okay for France to fulfill the terms of her agreement with Quebec, which were approved of by Ottawa in advance.